All right. Hello, David.
Hi, JB.
So this is a 15th live stream of the Music Hackspace, and we're excited to host today David Zicarelli, the CEO of Cycling 74, who's based in Santa Cruz, California. I'm here in London. So today, David, you've prepared some patches and demonstration of MC. Can you tell us a bit more about what MC stands for and what it's meant to achieve?
MC doesn't actually stand for anything. And we had a big discussion about what it could stand for. But one thing that is confusing is if you're talking about lots of audio channels, people immediately think you're talking about lots of speakers. But all the demos I'm going to show are actually just stereo. The audio channels are inside your computer, and that's the the secret of why it's fun. And but you could use it with lots of speakers if you wanted to. So I just think of it as like kind of alluding to multi-channel, but not in the traditional sense that people think, oh, I need like 5.1 or something like that. It's really um, actually a lot more than 5.1. It can be up to 1,024 channels, and the channels are really inside, not on the outside, and speakers and stuff like that.
Great. So I see in the comment that someone says that the sound is a bit low. Thank you for that. I think it's probably related to you, David. Um,
Is this better?
yes, I think it would be much better. Thank you. And thank you for letting us know. All right, so you have prepared some materials. You have four different patches that we will go through. We will explain the mechanisms that are of interest today. And so everyone who watches, you're most welcome to post comments at any time, but David will not be able to see them before the end of the presentation in each batch. So your question might be answered at the end of each batch, or maybe towards the end of the session. So I'm going to pass it over to you and disappear, David. So I'm going to share your screen now and remove myself. I will see you later. Over to you.
Thank you so much, JB. Um, well, good morning. It's morning here in Santa Cruz. So I'm going to show a few patches which are sort of elaborations of some things that I showed a couple years ago with Tom Hall, where we demonstrated some things that you can do with lots and lots of audio channels at the Ableton Loop conference to give a sense of one way of using MC. There's a lot of different approaches. Mine, you'll probably go like, hey, David likes vocoders and he likes pretty sounds and he likes to mess with samples. So that's kind of my thing, but it might not be your thing. So hopefully you'll get at least some technique ideas out of this, even if the aesthetics might not be your thing. And that's, of course, always the thing about Max is that you have to show something that's got some artistic aspect to it, even if you're really talking about how it works rather than, telling people that's what you should do with Mac. So just because I work on the program, don't think that I'm the expert about the greatest sound that you can make with the software. So I want to start with this patch, and I want to apologize. Made these things for looking at my own screen, and so maybe broadcasting them over a live stream. They're not going to be as clear as possible, but I'm going to zoom in to max and sort of scroll around a little bit as I point stuff out. So this is a really basic thing. It's the version of an example that I believe comes with Max 8 and kind of tells you kind of the two basic elements of MC. So this, and I'm going to use a feature of Max that you may not know about called where you press the H key and when the patch is unlocked, and it actually does this weird blue thing, and so it sort of shows you where I'm pointing. So that thing that says MC cycle tilde 440 chan 60 means that there are actually 60 cycle objects inside that one box, and they can each have their own frequency, or they can all be set to the same frequency. Coming out of that box, there's a 60 channel patch cord, and you can see that it has 60 channels because when you mouse over it, the number 60 shows up. And then it goes to another object, MC Mixdown, which mixes all 60 channels into 2. And then we have a MC gain slider here, and ultimately an MC DAC, and these just deal with 2 channels. So what I like about this silly example, which makes clicks, and it's not really the most refined thing, but it does sort of illustrate the idea of.
David, I'm
Yes.
sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
I think we're receiving some information that your mic is still too low. So I don't know if you are able to speak a bit closer to the mic. But I think the quality of
Well, I could be right next to it, and this is distorting for me.
it is distorting a little bit.
I wonder. All right.
Thank you, everyone, for letting us know.
Let's see what I can do here in the non-mic area to make it louder.
Thanks, Joshua. Joshua is telling us that it's distorting at his end as well.
How about now? Is that better?
I think it's better now. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna leave you to it. Just be mindful, but I might come back to.
How about now? Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. And I will reduce the distortion a little bit there. Okay. Okay. I don't know what else to do here. I've got everything except, everything is like right at the level of distortion. So I'm not sure what else to try here.
No, I think we should be fine now.
Okay.
Hopefully, yeah, much better and without distortion, says Joshua. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for bearing with us. Over to you.
Okay, so this message deviate $1440 is essentially going to generate random values around a center of 440. And so let's turn this on, and you'll hear there's a pure tone, because right now the value of $1 is 0 at the left end of the slider. And as I move it, you can hear that it's generating, and I'll turn this up a little bit. So it turns into this thing that's sort of like noise. And as I move it back, it goes back to the pure tone. So, we can also just visualize what's going on here. So this, it's also generating numbers with this constant signal here, and then we capture the signal values and display them in this multi-slider. And so when it's all the way over to the left, it's just a constant stream. All 60 channels are at 440, and as I move it over, you can see that they randomly generate values around. And the values are not regenerated unless I actually move the slider. So even though this sounds like this kind of dynamic shifting thing, it's actually just the interference of all the closely spaced frequencies of the oscillators, and there's nothing actually changing about this at all. So that illustrates this idea that you have a very simple control that does something complex, and that's what I like about MC, and it's kind of the basis of the other examples that I'm going to show. So the first one is a kind of lame random note generator thing, but it's sort of a game to see whether you can hear a change happen. Oh, not that one. This one. So make this a little bigger. Hopefully you can see. So this is a patch that generates a random melody of 15 notes using the whole tone scale. And if you're familiar with the whole tone scale, you know that if you were to play the whole tone scale on the piano, there are basically two different scales of, how many is that, 5 notes? Yes. And you can shift from one scale to the other by going up a half step. So one scale has the note C in it and the other has the note B in it. And so in this patch, all we're doing is generating the same 15 notes in some order, but we're going to be able to shift the offset of the scale to either an even number or an odd number. And so but what's fun about it is, so I have 15 voices of a synth. What's fun is that the change between one offset and the other happens over some amount of time. So instead of changing all the voices at once, it actually propagates the change over a period of time that you can set. Now, by default, I have the playback speed at an interval of 150 milliseconds and the propagation speed at 150 milliseconds as well. And this little progress bar will tell you every time I change the scale how far it's gotten into all 15 voices, going from the old offset to the new offset. And the question for you is, when do you hear it actually change from the old offset to the new offset? There's some period where you're definitely hearing the old one, then you'll hear, you're not quite sure, and then you'll definitely hear the new one, and it's not where you might think. And so this is really not demonstrating anything that cool about MC, but is an example of the kind of thing that you can, and I really like this auto propagation technique in general, and I'm going to be using it in other patches, and I thought this is a clear example of how to do this. So let me start this, and I will turn it up a little bit. So I hope you can hear the dream like quality of the whole tone scale. And now when I click this little button, I'm going to increment from an offset of 40 to an offset of 41, and then you'll see the slider move across the screen, and see when you think you hear the new one. Maybe don't watch the slider at first, I'll do it a couple times. Now I'm going to change it so the propagation is a little slower. Maybe the melody's a little slower too. And now it might be a little clearer, like exactly how the shift happens. So for me, it actually takes, it almost has to be at 100%, and you have to hear a few notes of the new whole tone scale. So let's look at a little bit of what's going on here, just from the MC perspective. So basically there are two things going on. One is this side of it is actually a bunch of oscillators which are just on all the time, and they're set to some 15 different whole tone frequencies. So when we change the scale offset, we turn a MIDI note into a frequency, and then we propagate the change to this MC saw, which has 15 different channels. And then to actually play the notes, we have this very simple envelope, and the set value message here means basically set value. Anything after the number argument of set value is the thing that actually does something to an individual max object inside the giant mega MC box. So in this case, we are sending the message 0 followed by a ramp, which goes from 0 to 1 in 40 milliseconds and then back down to 0 in 700 milliseconds. And so that just applies the envelope to an individual channel, and you hear whatever the frequency of that channel is. We mix them all together and listen to them. Okay, so that is that example. Now I'm going to show a example of using that propagation technique with something that actually does some audio processing. So So this example is going to use an MC object called MCP SF Play. This was introduced subsequent to the initial release of Max 8, and basically what it does is it collects a bunch of SF Play objects in one box. So there's an object called MC SF Play, and that is just one SF Play, but all the channels come out one patch cord. So if you had like an 8-channel audio file or something, you could have all 8 channels in one patch cord rather than having to eight separate patch cords. In this case, we have a bunch of mono, or they could be stereo or whatever, SF Play objects, and we're just listening to one channel, but we're listening to 32 different ones, and we can control each of those SF Plays independently in terms of when we start them. And so what we're going to do with this is we're going to be using the time stretch feature of SF Play, and then we're going to we use this deviate technique again, and we're going to set the speed to be half speed, but then a little bit different. So we deviate 0.05 around 0.5. So that'll give us like maybe 0.49 and 0.52 for all of these 32. I don't care what the details are. All I know is that they're slightly different. And so they'll all play back. If we started them all together, they'll all start at the same time, but then they'll all like kind of desynchronize, and it'll get worse over time because they're all more and more taking up different amounts of time as they loop. And then beyond that, we're going to have 32 copies of the Retune object. And we know they're 32 because, well, first we could look at this patch cord, but the second reason is that the MC has this feature called auto adapt, where if there are 32 outputs here, this you don't have to say that this one has 32 channels. It will just figure that out from the fact that this one has got 32 outputs. So the object at the top always needs to say how many channels it is, but then after that, anything below that you can just assume it will figure out what to do. So what we're going to do with the Retune is it has a feature where you can basically send it this message enabled notes, and that basically is what it tries to retune your original signal into. So for example, if you say enabled note 0, it will try to retune everything into C. So C is the original note as far as I remember in the scale. If you said enabled note 0, 1, it would try to force things into C and C sharp together. So what we're going to do is use that propagation technique so that we retune notes and when we press a key on these keyboards, and but it will take a certain amount of time to go through all the voices and retune them. And in the meantime, it's using whatever the old tunings were. So the effect is that you can get these kind of chords that sort of shift over time without you having to do anything, because the propagation is changing to, voice 27 has just changed like 2 seconds later or something like that. But in the meantime, like you're listening to voice 1 with the new tuning. So I'm using a sample of my son Bruno saying big, huge double bass when he was 2, which has come with MSP since the very beginning. And Bruno didn't know that actually his voice was in Max until only a few years ago. And he said, "Dad, that's messed up." So so that he doesn't sound like he was 2 years old, I've pitch shifted him down by 75, like 25%. So he sounds a little bit older, and but he's also going to sing in tune. So to start this, I have to just turn this restart note change on, and then I'm going to turn this up a little bit. Okay, so every time I play a different note, you hear that they start together, and then because they're all deviated, they all fall apart and kind of form this sort of cloudy sound. And then here is the effect of like playing notes faster than they propagate. So you can hear that we get chords out of this. And then we can turn this restart feature off. Increase the propagation to, let's say, 400 milliseconds. And now if I just wait for that thing to go all the way over, you'll hear that eventually it's just the C's. And then you hear the gradual introduction of the E flats. I can also change this to something more extreme if you want to hear. So now they will have a higher deviation of speeds. So now if I put the restart on note change on again, they fall apart really quickly. Okay. Now let's look at the next example. So next one, there's a so I think JB posted in the chat a link to some of those patches that we showed at Loop a couple years ago. This is kind of taken from that one. Let's make it a little bigger. So the idea here is that we have a, where is the, so this, wait, this thing right here, the MC Resonant is an 88 channel resonant filter. So there are 88 audio channels going in there. Notice that the playlist objects that are going in here, it's just one channel, but then they automatically get copied to all the channels. So we just need to feed this filter with one channel and we get 88 channels out. And I've set up this little thing here when the patch loads that initializes the filter coefficients to the 88 notes of a piano using the chromatic scale. So essentially what we have here now is a filter that we can essentially play like a piano and play stuff through it. And then we have control over the bandwidth of all the filters. This would be something like if you were messing with this patch, you might want to use deviation or some kind of variation on that. And then each delay is going into its own, each filter is going into its own delay line. So you have individual control over 88 delay lines on each of the 88 filters. And there we use deviate to have a sort of random set of delay times around either 100 or 500 milliseconds. And then finally, I have the standard little delay modulation bank of 88 sine waves that's modulating each of the delays independently to give that little bit more variation to the sound. So I have two different keyboards for controlling this. One is basically one octave, and the red notes are the ones that are on in that particular case, and that will expand that octave to the entire range of the 88 keys. And this 88 key K slider here, you get to pick the specific notes that you want. So it only uses the note that you put. And when you switch from one of these to the other, it goes into the new mode. So let's just listen to what this sounds like with just plain white noise first. I'll give you some of the idea of what it does. So let's turn this down a little bit, I think. Let's try this again. So this is with the scale. So I can basically just make a chord here. So now I just have a C, and if I want to make a major scale, I'll do that. And I think it sounds like a science documentary. So, and if I take them all away, then eventually it goes away. I have another thing here. I'm using a MC feature called Scaled Exponential. This is a little bit subtle, but the idea is that each of the delays can have a feedback coefficient effectively. And by using Scaled Exponential, I can spread a variety of feedback coefficients over the entire space of the 88 channels in a kind of harmonic or exponential relationship. And so when this slider is over here, then it's mostly the same numbers and they tail off quickly at the very end, whereas over here, the exponential curve tails off quickly, and then so really the lower notes of the thing are the ones that you're hearing, but it's needs some tweaking to be actually more audible. So let's turn the noise off, and then I have a sample that comes with Max playing along with a famous poem that feels somehow relevant to the current world. So we'll mix those together and then play them through this thing and see what it sounds like. So we'll start with this guy here. Here are some presets of the piano keyboard. They sound better with a bigger bandwidth or tighter. Let's get this going. So now I'll switch to a different chord. Let's see if I stop both of these things, then you can hear how much delay component there is. And then if I move this over here, you'll hear it's a little bit shorter. Way over here, it's like this. Okay, so maybe yeah, I think that's pretty much the way this works. Maybe again the basically this signal here is the way that you can individually control the delay time. So we're generating 88 different delay times, and then this signal you can see it's sending in these sine waves. It's modulating in just a little bit, and they'll add them together right here, and so the result is added together, and then effectively is the delay time on the delay line. Okay, so the last two examples I want to show. So I have the last example is a kind of, I guess, granular kind of thing, but the way that it works, I think, is maybe something that might be new to some of you who've done experiments with this, and it uses the Msp Train Object, which is kind of a boring object. All it does is do things that are on and off, and essentially you control the interval of when you want it to cycle between 0 and 1. And the what you're looking at, maybe make this a little bigger. What you're looking at here is a visualization of these two train objects, and one of them is they're both having an interval of 2,000 milliseconds, and they have pulse width of 50%. And I've got some sliders here. I can move the pulse width and the phase, which is when in the cycle the high part of the pulse starts. And I just want to kind of manipulate these, and you'll see that even without changing the interval of this train, you can get them into very complex relationships. So now I've made the pulse width of this one on the right shorter, so it spends more time at 0 and less time at 1. Now I can move the phase around, and you'll see it's already like even hard at this point to sort of hear what or even see what's going on. And now I can apply this to triggering samples. So I've got these two playlist objects, and when there's a transition between 0 and 1, as you can see from this number here, an audio signal comes out, as you can see, which goes to this edge object. And when the edge object sees a 0 to 1 signal transition, or non-zero, I guess it is, it will trigger a bang, and this bang both starts the sound and it starts a ramp. And then when the transition goes from 1 to 0, it triggers a ramp back down to 0. So if I turn this up, you can hear that it's triggering some of the sound, but it cuts off. But if we mess with the pulse width, we can make it either shorter or longer. The phase isn't going to affect where in the sample it plays, but it does affect the timing relative to the other one. So now I could get this one going. So now they have different phases and different pulse widths, but they're still triggering at the same interval. Now I could make this one go some other random, like 1800, let's say. And at some point, you're just going to lose your ability to hear like this. Now, it's like a kind of phasing effect. They got together and now they're like going apart again. So now I know what you're thinking. What does 100 of these sound like? And that's what we're going to listen to. So I just wanted to sort of illustrate the basic technique that I'm going to be using, which is just having a bunch of these, randomizing or controlling in various ways these three parameters: interval, pulse width, and phase, but doing it over the space of 100 of these, and having 100 independent playback, sample playback being controlled this way. And the pulse width thing is pretty cool because that's what gives this kind of spaciness, where it's not 100 things playing all the time, all at the all together, but things come in and out, and that has the kind of granular flavor to it, but it's different somehow. So let's see what you think. So this one, I've made the MC part green. So let's notice that it's pretty much the same technique. So except we are using MC with the train object, and we have 100 channels and then 100 MC edges, or 100 edges, detecting the on and off of the pulse. When you have MC edge, because it has this non-signal output, it has to tell you what voice of the 100 it's triggering. So basically there's a sequence of outputs here where, let's say that there's an on edge detected. The first thing that comes out is the voice number, and then the second thing that comes out is this bang that triggers this. And so what happens is we use MC target, which is this very convenient way of controlling things with voice numbers. So the voice number comes out here, goes into the right inlet of MC target, and then based on the on trigger, we calculate a start time in our sample that we want to play, and MC target makes sure that that targets the specific voice that was detected by MC edge. And so there are 100 of these play objects here, and we can make sure that the play object corresponding to the train that just had its edge go high gets played. So just think about the complexity of that patch that I just showed with the two train objects, and imagine having to do that 100 times. Like, you don't want to do that. And one of the values of MC for me is that you'd never, because you don't want to do that, you never would try this kind of stuff. And so there's this whole space of exploration personally that I've been able to find with doing what does 100 of these things sound like that I would never have otherwise been able to try, because it would just be this, something I would never have the patience to make 100, multiply all the connections I had to make in that patch and make them 100 times or whatever. So that's something that's been really fun for me to play around with this stuff. So this example uses a sample. Just get the name of this right. Sorry. So the song is called Rien n'est changé, and the artist is named Sandy Shaw. And I discovered this because I heard another song on the radio or something on this album, which was called La Belle Époque, EMI's French Girls, 1965 to 1968. And I discovered that the mysterious Ms. Shaw recorded her music not only in French, but also in Spanish and English. So she would make the identical album where she would sing the French lyrics, and then she'd make a Spanish version and an English version. I don't even know if Sandy Shaw is her real name, but if you're into this kind of music, you might be into this kind of music. So what I tried to do with this, sort of respecting maybe the original a little bit, is I'm trying to, rather than turn Sandy into kind of like a techie robot kind of sound, I'm trying to do something that sounds more like a French impressionist painting. So the sample sizes are longer, and because there are 100 of them, they kind of wash together in a different kind of way. You could certainly do that kind of granular style thing with this, but I'm more interested in these longer things. And then another thing about this is that I actually, while I was working on this week, I added some features to the train object for things I wanted to do. And those didn't make it into our 8.1.4 release that we just had yesterday. So if you try this patch, these two features up here won't work, but you'll still get basically the same sound. But these are essentially ways of manipulating the way that the train object's 0 and 1 phase is can be just basically restarted immediately. And that's really cool when you have 100 of them and you all want to restart them at the same time. The previous way that you could do that was with turning the audio on and off again. And then the other feature is where if you change the interval of the pulse train, so let's say you go from 2,000 milliseconds to 10, it immediately stops the cycle that it was doing at 2,000 and starts doing the 10. And with this defer interval change feature, you can wait until it's completed that cycle before it goes to the new one. And this creates a more subtle, elegant effect when you're using it in this particular application. Okay, so enough talking. I'm just going to sort of perform with this a little bit and make sure that everything's working. And it's kind of, I could play with this forever, but I will restrain myself to a couple minutes here. So to get it started, you actually have to draw out a range of some kind, and then it should kick into high gear. So I'm going to turn the volume down a little bit here. And I can't actually see if I have the audio on because of the, yeah. Okay. So this, one other thing, so this range slider is the space of the entire song. So I can just skip around and play with different parts of the song and draw out a pretty coarse range, which I actually like, not really knowing where I am, and get different sounds that way.
Il m'aime encore, oui je le sais. Il m'aime encore, oui je le sais. Il m'aime encore, oui je le sais. Il
Okay, so that was all the stuff I wanted to show, and oh, I guess go back to this. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to respond to them.
Great. Well, I'll get started with some question, and first an observation: how lucky we are to see the CEO and founder of Cycling 74 do some live coding for us. I think I'm very grateful that you did that tonight or this morning for you. So just maybe to go back and for those who join us halfway through the live stream, MC was designed to solve a problem, which was you could do things in multi-channel and in with Poly probably and a few others, but so the idea was to limit the complexity and allow it to work with a very large quantity of audio channels. That was a motivation, right?
Well, the thing about Poly is every time you want to try something, you have to go in and change the thing and then save it and then try it again. Whereas this, there's no like going into anything. You're always at this level of the actual design of your patch or something like that, and it just feels different. So probably everything that I showed you could figure out some way to do with Poly, but I never would have done it, and it's sort of like a conceptual or cognitive change a little bit. I mean, it sounds like maybe, if you're certain kind of programmer, you're like, well, why did you need to do it? Have another way to do something. I don't know. But that's the best way that it can explain it, is it just like reveals things about relationships that you would never think of otherwise.
Right.
So I don't know if it's really about solving a problem exactly as much as, I kind of figured this out by accident. And the accident was that I was making an example for someone where I wanted to show them that you can do stuff in Max where you have secret patch cords that communicate not in the usual way. And I just made an example that communicated 4 channels of audio. And so I was listening to this thing send the 4 channels of audio, and then I deleted the patch cord and all 4 channels went away. And I was like, wow, that is so cool. And that is, that was one of the accidental insights. I was like, oh, I have to do something with this. And then the other one being this, all the messages like deviate and scaled exponential and stuff like that, where you have this, you think of the audio channels in one object as a big space that you can control rather than, and that's the kind of thing you never would think about with poly. And it's actually very difficult to think of each voice in each patch in a poly as being like in a kind of a one element of a space or something like that.
Right. So most of the objects in MC, if not all of them, exist already in Max, in MSP. Are there some that are not, that are unique to MC, and are there some that are in MSP that are not available in MC?
I think for the most part, most of the Max objects, they are available in MC via the what's called the MC wrapper. So if I say MC cycle tilde, it's actually, there is no special MC cycle tilde object. There's a wrapper object that knows how to deal with 100 cycles and lets you, so all these standard messages like deviate or scaled exponential are available for the cycle object, for the sig object, for all of those objects. So then whatever you learn, whatever techniques you've tried with one, you can try with the others.
I see.
Then there's some special, one other thing is that there's some special objects in MC that deal with the signals themselves. So there's a pack and unpack. So you can go from the regular MSP patch cords to the multi-channel patch cords and that sort of thing.
Great. And I noticed as well that the cables in MC are blue. So that's a new concept of the one cable that represents a quantity of audio channels.
Oh, that's correct. And we also added this thing so you can see kind of what the signals are. So if I turn the audio on again here, you can see that there's this signal probe that's multi-channel, and you can actually page through all the different signals. That's probably a little small for people to see, but so there's a few little things like that have been added to support the MC.
All right, so we have a few questions from the chat that I'm going to bring up here. This one from Andre. Hi, Andre. So in the MCP SF play example, you're separating the individual voices with the deviate. Wondering if there's a way to control each voice independently with a multi-slider. Similarly,
yes.
On the
So because it's the MC wrapper, so MCP SF play is actually the SF play object inside the MC wrapper. So you can use the MC target or set value with MCP SF play and just start one of those SF plays without starting the other ones.
Okay. I have another question from Gennaro. Thank you, Gennaro. Can you talk a little bit about a basic policy setup with MC and how the MC target object works?
Sure. So the maybe we go back to the
to your screen.
I showed. Sure, I'm going to show the screen, which would be the. There's definitely more interesting examples that come with Max than this one, but maybe it helps to have someone pointing at stuff to illustrate a couple of concepts. So the thing I'm not doing in this one is there's these features, MC voice allocator and note allocator, that basically allow you to do the same kind of voice allocation mapping of events like MIDI to individual voices and manage manage polyphony that way, and this is a feature of Poly. And frankly, Poly is probably better if that's what you're trying to do, but you can do it with MC. The way I'm doing polyphony in this case is I just have a earn object that's picking a number between 0 and 14, adding 1, because all MC voices start at 1, because if you say set value or MC target 0, that means you're applying it to everything. And then we use this line object with that particular voice. So MC target is really just a convenience around the message set value. So if I say set value 7, then anything following that goes to instance number 7 of whatever MC object you're dealing with. So this is probably the most simple way to do a kind of allocation. It doesn't actually work because if you do this too fast, your random voices could run into each other and you'll have a click. But effectively, that's what you're going to want to do when you're managing a kind of voices in a synth. You're basically going to keep track of which ones are playing and use one that isn't playing, and that's what the MC voice allocator does. It has a feature where you can actually feed it the audio from the synth, and the multi-channel audio watches the multi-channel audio signal, and when that any particular channel goes back to 0, it says, oh, okay, that voice is available for me to retrigger.
Okay, so we have another question. Very interesting one from Phelan. Is it possible to develop max MC externals in the SDK?
Yes, I actually have some information about that, and maybe at this point the best way to get that is to get in touch with me directly, and I can forward that to you. But we have an example, and in fact this object, which you may not have known was around, let me share my screen again here. This grid meter, the source for that is included in the SDK, and it shows how to do that. So normally, if you just write a regular MSP object, you don't need to do anything. But if you want to write your own like crazy meter like this, then the SDK would be helpful to know the little tricks to take advantage of MC. But for example, the MC line tilde object doesn't exist. It's just the line tilde object inside the MC wrapper. So if you've written a normal max object, there's a very simple thing that you can do to just make it enabled for MC by just sending a message to max, and it will magically work.
So is there a benefit as well of using MC over Poly in terms of CPU?
It should be pretty much the same. In fact, there are efficiencies that are different in each case. So MC tries to turn off processing when it doesn't think that things are being used. And Poly also does that, but they do it in sort of different ways. So it's really hard to say in a general way which is going to be more efficient. But the MC is not some magic thing, and it wasn't really intended as a way to make doing lots of stuff in Max more efficient. It might be, but it was really, again, it's addressing a cognitive thing about creativity and looking at things in a different way, more than it was just purely about performance.
Sure. So, and as such, I suppose it works in Max for Live too?
It does, although you can't edit MC patches. So you can, if you make something in MC, it will run in Max for Live, but then you can't edit it unless you have the full version of Max.
Oh, I see. Okay. So, but that does still open some possibilities for sure. Andre has another question. Well, maybe it's more of an observation. In a way, MC is a more creative poly. I'm thinking how it would work to put multiple MC with a lot of voices inside a poly or an MC poly.
Yes, you can put, as long as you deal with the single channel input and output of poly itself. People have wanted to have the ability for each poly voice to have multiple channel inputs and outputs. That isn't currently supported yet. But if you want to do something with the, if you mix all the channels to a single channel, you could, or you had like, let's say you had 5, you wanted to do something with, use MC wrapper with 5 channels, a bunch of objects with 5 channels in them, then you could use MC unpack 5 and split them to 5 separate outputs or something like that. But you can't, at this time, you can't use a multi-channel output inside the poly voice.
I see. When you were live coding earlier, I thought of Andre because we received Andre a few weeks ago where we presented Granularize, which is this granular synthesizer he built with Max. And I can imagine the complexity that he went through to have all of those. And I imagine without MC at the time he started it. And I suppose the complexity typically of a big granular synthesizer would be massively reduced. So the patch that you performed with earlier was deceptively simple on just the complexity of and the number of objects that were visible on screen.
Yes, so I can't deal with making incredibly complex things in Max. Like, it's just, I'm not good at Max, so basically that's the problem, right? So MC solves a problem for me, which I can make things that are conceptually simple and I can remember how they work the next time I open them. A lot of these things that I made, like that I showed today, I didn't really put that much time into. If I were going to really, get more serious about performing them, the control aspect, like mapping MIDI to what's interesting in these patches, like that takes way longer than the actual DSP aspect of it. This is something that Miller Puckett, the original author of Max, always said is like, the DSP part of Max is nothing special. It's just basically the, same thing as Max Matthews Music 5. The control is like where all the action is. And
right.
Some of what's cool about MC is too that it gives you a new way to apply control in this powerful way where you can just statistically deal with a population of 100 things with one number changing, which was really hard to do before that. So that's where I think the fun of Max is like coming up with cool ways to control stuff, but it's also where all the work is. And you can tell, like, Andre does all the work and like finds these really amazing ways to control stuff. Like, I'm kind of a dilettante at that right now. And I would need another 3 weeks, I feel like, of at least just one little patch to get this like really, really right. And then I got to practice.
Right. So we have another question that I'll bring about in a second. But in the meantime, I'd be very curious to hear from people who are watching if they have tried MC, and if not, why not? What could be the barriers for them to start using that? So please share with us on the chat, and we'll have a look. So we have a question from Julien Poidevin, which I'm going to bring up. Is it possible to specialize a large number of MC channels individually?
Yeah, so there's actually one of the examples. If we go back to my screen, I can show a um, basic example of this. I think it's this one. So in this example, I had all of those delays, and you may remember. So all the examples, I spatialized everything in the default way with MC Mixdown, which essentially takes all the even channels and pans them hard left, and all the odd channels and right, or vice versa. I can't remember. But MC Mixdown also has a signal input here, and here is an example where I have an MC range object. This is a new object for MC, and basically what it does is you give it two values, a low and a high, and it basically creates a range of constant values between the low and the high value. And what I'm doing here is, so there's a space of there are different modes that you can put MC Mixdown into in terms of how you control the panning of each channel. But MC Mixdown can have any number of outputs. Right now we just have 2. And then we can use this signal to have a space of control for each of the corresponding channels coming in here. So there are 88 channels here, 88 channels here. And as you can see, each of these channels has a slightly different value, and they go from 0 to 8. So what is 8 about here? Well, I found when I just made them go from 0 to 1 that essentially the lower frequencies of my filter were over to the left and the higher ones were over to the right, and that just seemed lame. So what I'm doing instead is taking advantage of the wraparound feature of MC Mixdown. So you can actually go from 0 to 8 and it will wrap the channels around and sort of like take the modulo of the channel, the value, and for however many channels you have, like the space between 0 and 1. So this is a way of distributing the filter across the entire stereo space. And the other thing that you can do, instead of using just constant values for the signal, each of those channels could be moving around. So then that means that you could have, in this case, 88 separate filters, each of which is being moved around in the stereo or 4-channel space dynamically, and that could even be in response to notes or many other things. So that's another cool thing about keeping all of these channels separate, is that when you go to spatialize them or mix them, you can do crazy panning things with them, like in continuous ways that would be very difficult if you'd already mixed. Like most synths, for example, when you use a synth plugin, it's already been mixed to stereo, and so you can't do any of that kind of stuff. And this makes this like a lot more flexible. So I don't know if that answers the question, but definitely possible to move things around using MC Mixdown like that.
Okay, well, I suppose they would let you know, let us know if it answers the question. I didn't see anybody, I mean, apart from Phil, and thank you for saying that you explored it. I'm curious to see if people had, how it was to see a change of concept in Max. And many of you, I'm sure, have been using Max for a long time. And when a paradigm shift arrives in the software, how attached are you to the tool that you know? Even if there's benefit that are obvious in MC, how are people getting into it, and what's stopping you? So, well, there's a few things, a few comments, observation from Martin. The beautiful Audio Roots Max 5 collection uses MC. That's, I don't know if you know about this, David. No, I suppose it's a device that's in Max for Live. We have a comment from Andre, whose granularize device is probably one of the most complex things I've ever seen realized in Max. I really like the MC concept. It's great to also see MIDI2 adoption. Oh, that's interesting. So what's your What's your take on MIDI 2.0? I mean, and does it have any relevance to MC? I guess it doesn't really have one.
Yeah, that actually has one thing that's super relevant, which is it's much easier to do note-specific control. And so I've done a lot of fun stuff with the C-board and MC. So think about that example where I was playing the filter with that keyboard. So every one of those filter bands could be assigned to a different key on the keyboard, and then you have individual control over, say, the bandwidth could be mapped to something, and the gain could be mapped to how hard you press the key down. All of that, like in a this note-specific control, which is possible with MPE, is just expanded exponentially in MIDI 2. So I think it's going to be really very useful for those kinds of applications.
That sounds great. Gennaro has made a comment on his use, and been loving using it, especially with MC Train Object. Have been hitting little wall figuring out how to trigger the polyphony correctly, but the sonics are well worse as a puzzle.
Yeah, I would definitely say that's one of the feedback that I've been hearing as people. The sort of polyphony management aspect of MC is probably where people run into the most trouble, and so it's definitely something I want to look at, finding ways to make that maybe a little easier conceptually for people to understand. It's
Right.
a very new, different model compared to the traditional voice allocation model. So in MC, that one way of thinking about it is like you can basically afford to think about 88 notes as a piano, or you can think about a guitar with 100 strings or something like that. And whereas in sort of the traditional polyphony management, it's all based on scarcity, because the computer was only powerful enough to do, say, 8 things at a time. So you had to do all this elaborate trickery to make sure that the last 8 things that you were playing were assigned to the 8 notes that you're currently working with. And all that trickery actually goes away. But we're all so used to this world of scarcity and only having 8 things to do or whatever, that we haven't gotten our heads around like this newer model where we're just like, oh, we have an infinite number of channels and we can just we don't have to worry about managing like a limited number of things. So you have to figure out sort of how to meld those two ideas, make people sort of, because it's true, like a computer can't, you're doing something really expensive, you can't have 1,000 of them right now, but there will always be some need for thinking about this scarcity perspective. But for a lot of problems, you don't have to think that way. You can actually think more analogous to how the real world works.
Right. So I have a general question, which is there any other paradigm shift that is coming to Macs? In the same vein, like, because this will change the practice of Macs users. People who have not been to Macs in 15 years but might find it quite changed. Are there other things on the front end of the patching? Any ideas that you have to make patching easier and to make all that process be less complex?
Well, one thing is that there are a few examples of this already. MC can be applied to non-audio things. So there's currently MC Gen. Gen is new in Max 8 without the tilde. So Gen can do events now and not just audio, a DSP. And there's an MC Gen. And so this is a example where you can have 50 copies of something generating event level kinds of things in Mac. So the it's a little bit more awkward to work with MC in the event world because you have to keep passing the channel number around along with the actual data that you're dealing with. But we can apply this to any normally behaving regular max object, and that's something that I'm looking forward to working on, adding more capabilities in that area in the future. So that will, like, I've always wanted to have, I don't know, like in Max, you have the metro object that's sending out bangs at regular interval, but what if you could have 100 of those, like sending out bangs that are slightly off from each other? And you want to do that, you don't want to have to make 100 metro objects. So that MC can be applied in that space as well. I mean, that's the first thing that comes to mind when I think of like making patching easier, is like making this really complicated patching easier. There might be other things that exist in the world of making simple patches easier to think about, but I don't know. My head is in this MC space right now, so that's what that was what came to my mind.
I was muted, I'm sorry. So it's almost time for us to wrap. So with the virus that has happened for the past 3 months, Loop has been cancelled, and so it's been rescheduled to next year, I think. Are you planning to go to Loop in Berlin?
Boy, you're putting me on the spot. Well, I guess if airplanes are flying and I can get out of the country and I can get into another country, then, you know, I would certainly think about it. I probably am not going to be presenting anything, but
right.
I have enjoyed attending it.
But there's also Expo, which is I'm trying to put some markers in the future for people who are interested to engage with you and, like, you know, maybe present their work if they work with Max. And Max Expo last year happened in April. This year it's not happening this year, but it's going to happen in 2021. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, we're
is
not
that a
sure
date
about,
fixed?
We don't have a fixed date yet. The value for us of Expo, maybe in the abstract sense, and why we would want to do it in the future, there are two things. One is we look at it as a sort of volunteer effort of as many people in the company as possible. So we think of, you know, maybe it be worth mentioning that we're already a company where everyone worked at home. So our lives have not changed really that much at all in terms of, you know, being at home. But at the same time, like, we don't have the opportunities to see the people that we work with normally unless we make an explicit attempt to get together. So Expo was one of those opportunities, and we could work together in serving the community, putting on this event. And we both get closer to the community and learn what our customers are thinking. And it's actually amazing. Like, you know, I'm a big advocate of virtual communication, but there's something magic about just like being in the presence of other people and suddenly like, oh yeah, I should have added that feature to the software. I don't know what happens, but that happens. And so then the other value of getting together is for the community itself, and people get to see what's going on and make connections, and what we hope future collaborations can come out of that. And I know that that's happened in the past. So I'm really hoping that we can put on an event at some point.
Right. Well, I mean, if there's any way this humble channel can help bring people together, I'd be very happy to participate in any way. So we're going to finish with one last question from Nella. Hello, Nella. Can you use MC objects to drive 1,000 speakers? I split in MC DAC.
Yes. So as of some recent version of Max 8, you can actually have 1,024 outputs. So if you send a 1,000-channel patch cord to MC DAC, it will figure out that you have 1,000 sources, and it will, if you've mapped them to individual audio outputs of an audio interface, they will all go to separate places.
Oh, that's amazing. I don't know for any audio interface that has that many outputs, but
I'm imagining that this is for things like wave field arrays and stuff like that.
right. Yeah, that makes sense. Great.
Which everyone needs in their house.
For the quality of the specialization.
Yeah, I think if we can bring this to the consumer market, that's be really important.
Is it easy to specialize sound with Max for wavefield arrays?
Yes, I think the SPAT from Earcom is a great way to do that.
Okay.
That's what I would use. And it's been
Great.
somewhat rewritten in MC too. So
okay. Well, a lot of things to follow up for people if they have access to SPAT and access to an array of 1,000 speakers, then they can try reproduce this wonderful, and I've seen it at Expo last year. It was amazing. The examples for wavefield synthesis. So, well, thank you very much, David, for joining. You're welcome anytime here to present features of Max or to talk about the journey. And there was a question that I did not bring up today, but that could be the topic of another live stream about the Max journey and the 30 years of existence it had and the impact it has to the world. So that could be the topic of another talk. So thank you again. Thank you everyone for watching. There was a lot of people today watching and participating in asking questions. So thank you everyone. We will have another live stream on Monday. And also of importance, if you're Max users and you want to discover some of the latest feature of Max 8.1.4, Darwin Gross is doing a workshop this coming Saturday at a time that's reasonable for people even in the Pacific coast, but not so much maybe in New Zealand or Australia. It will be 8 a.m. in Pacific time. It will be 11 a.m. in New York and 4 p.m. in the UK. 5 p.m. in Berlin. So with Darwin Gross and Tom Hall as well, who's going to join to help, and myself, this workshop will be held on Saturday. You can still get a ticket and ask questions and participate to this great workshop featuring some of the new aspects of Max 8.1.4. So thanks everyone. Thank you, David, and I'll see you soon on this channel.
Thanks a lot, JB, and thanks for all of you who sat through the whole thing and watched the other things that JB's doing. It's really amazing that he's been putting these together. 15. It's pretty cool.
Thank you, David.